Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Lovely weather over here because it's springtime. Today I bring to you this second and last part of my RIA testing crash course. Now I'm very excited because this is like the very juicy part. This is where we'll be testing our application for its functionality. So we are going to be testing for what happens when the user fills and submits a form, which is actually called the firing event. We're going to be making use of async queries. We're going to be mocking third-party libraries. We're going to be mocking async functions, promises, API calls, and all of that. So if you have not yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please, what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share the video because it promises to be enlightening. Now it's time for us to get our hands dirty with some JavaScript code. So guys, here is the application we are going to be testing. It's a Netflix clone which I built recently, and we're going to be testing what's happening here on this page. We're also going to be testing what is happening here on this page. So in the part one of this tutorial, I gave a detailed walkthrough of what this application looks like. If you haven't watched the part one, please go back and watch it. I'm going to be linking it somewhere up. So what we have here on the screen is the sign up screen, or you can also call it the sign in screen, which is basically this particular screen that has email address and password. From the part one of this tutorial, what we did was to test the visibility, the visible components, which are the components that we see when the user lands on this page, which includes the sign-in test here, the email input element, the password input element, the sign-in button, this text down here, and this sign-up button, and all that. And that is what we have in this describe block, which says visible component on load. So we are testing for visible component on load, and we actually have the sign up screen component up here. Remember what I said about putting it in a browser router component, and I had to do this so that I don't have to repeat this render in every test block. So what we just need to do is to render just the mock sign up component. That's all we need to do. So rather than repeating this here in all the test block, we just put in the mock sign up screen. So take your time and go through this part of the test. Go back to the part one and see how we're able to come up with everything here, how we're also able to test what happens when the user fills in email from the login page, from the initial page, which actually loads. Yeah, what happens when the user fills in their email address here. Now going into the functionality, we have a function here that I just added, which says fill and submit button. It takes the email, password, and the button. And the reason why we have button here is because there are actually two buttons on that form. We have the sign in button and the sign up or register button. So what we have here is a firing event which says to which we are using to fill in the email input element. We also have the one for the password input, and then we have a fire event to click on the button, whether the sign in button or the sign up button. Now down here I have made comments on the different functionalities that we are going to be testing, including the edge cases. So we are going to be testing for invalid input elements like the email and the password. We are going to be testing for what happens when user clicks on the sign in button, what happens when there is an error, probably the user entered the wrong password, what happens when the user clicks on sign up, which is registration, what happens when there is a network error or something just didn't go well. what is the user going to see? Yeah, so these are the things that we're going to be testing in this tutorial. Now, for you to test your component, you actually need to know what's going on in the component itself. So we are going to be opening our component file on the left hand side, and we'll be having the test file on the right hand side. I'm going to be closing the sidebar, and here it is. So we have the register method, we have the sign in method or function, sorry, and then we have the component itself. So the first thing we're going to be doing is to fill the form, submit it, and expect an error message to show up because we filled an invalid email, and also because we are going to be filling an invalid password, and that is testing for the form validation, which we have up here. Now, the first thing that happens when the user visits this particular page is that the sign up screen is rendered. So we repeat the same thing by rendering the sign up screen, which we have marked up here. We've marked it up here. So in this case, we're not passing an email. We are assuming that the email input element is empty, the password input element is empty as well. So we render the sign up screen here. And after that, we want to fill the form and submit it. Now we are going to get the sign up button, of course, and like I said in the previous tutorial, you get the sign up button by using the button row and the name of the button, which in this case is actually the content of the button, like what is displayed on the button, which is what we have here in this sign in. Please just ignore this use as a guest button. I added this here so that whoever wants to try out this application can just try it out as a guest, because we are not going to be factoring it into our test. We're assuming that it's not there. Yeah, thank you. So we have the sign in button, which we got by the button sign in, and then we are going to be submitting the form, filling and submitting the form. We have the invalid email address. Of course, this email address is not valid because there is no @ in it. Then we have the password. This password is valid, but we don't care about it right now because we just want to test for the email address. Then we have the sign in button. So what is happening in this fill and submit button form is that we get the email by the placeholder test. Remember we talked about it earlier. Then we get the password by the placeholder test. Then we fill in the email address using the email that, of course, we passed uh, into the function. We also fill the password and then we click on the button. So that is what a user does when they visit that particular page. Now we want to check for this error message to be sure that the user is seeing the right error message, which is supposed to say, please enter a valid email address. So for us to do that, we need to get the alert components using the get by row alert, and that is because we manually assigned it a row down here. Yeah, this is the error component, so we assigned it a row of alert, so we are going to be using that row to get the element, and then after getting the element as error message element, we say that we are expecting it to have the test content, please enter a valid email address, and that is because the form validation function actually says so, to set the form error as please enter a valid email address. So that is what is happening here. Sorry. That is what is happening on line 63. On line 64, we are expecting that the sign in with email and password function should not have been called. So we say to have been called 0 times. You can also say expect signing with email and password dot not dot to have been called. Yes, that is also valid. Now this is saying that we haven't defined signing with email and password, and that's because we have it inside here in the sign-in function. This is our sign-in function here. So the sign-in function calls the sign-in with email and password method of Firebase authentication, and then it takes the authentication. It takes the auth variable, it takes the email variable, and then it takes the password variable as well. What we have to do is that the same way we imported the sign-in with email and password here, we imported it from Firebase auth, we also need to import it into our test file because we are going to be using it in our test file. So we'll go up here, copy this and place it in the test file. Copy this as well, place it in the test file. Then what we need to do, and this is where we start talking about mocking functions. What we need to do is to mock our Firebase auth module. Now we'll say mock the Firebase auth method, and we are going to be using Jest in this case. Remember, we are using two libraries for our test. We are using Jest and we are using the React testing library, which is, of course, like I said, is built out of the Jest testing library. So we're going to say jest.mock, and we're going to say the name of the module we want to mock, which is this Firebase/auth we have here. And then we're going to add a callback function because we want to mock the method that is being provided by this particular module or this third-party library that we are mocking. So, and that includes the create user with email and password, the sign in with email and password. So we'll be having the callback function here. And then we are just going to go straight to what we are returning just by adding it in a bracket, and that is we are returning an object. So we'll just say that we want to say that the create user with email and password will be a mocked jest function. So we'll say jest dot function. Then we'll repeat the same thing for the other one, which is the sign in with email and password. Now there's a third one, which is the auth. This particular auth we are importing from our utils functions. I'm just going to show it up here with utils and Firebase. This is the auth function from Firebase, and we actually got it from this get auth, which is also gotten or imported from Firebase/auth. So we're just going to pick it up as well and put it here instead. I doubt if we're going to use this directly, but let's just mock it as well because we'll be using it in the create user with email and password function and the sign in with email and password function. So it's advisable we mock it as well. So we'll say just dot function yes, and that is what we need for now. The other thing we'll be doing in terms of mocking these functions, it will depend on the result, the outcome we want. So if we want the operation to be successful, then we are going to mock it with a resolved value, or we are going to imitate how we want it to behave when there's a successful resolving of the function or the promise itself. Then if we want it to be rejected, probably something went wrong. We are trying to simulate real life scenarios. So let's say something went wrong, the user's email address is wrong or does not exist on our database, or the password is wrong. Something is just wrong. So we are going to be using a mock rejection. Okay. So, but for now, this is where we are going to leave it at. As we go into the test, we will now decide what behavior we want to expect. Now going back to the test we wrote, I'm going to minimize some of these describe blocks. Yeah, I think that's enough. So this is the test case we are dealing with at the moment. Now the sign in with email and password is no longer having a red flag on it. And I think it's time for us to test this test case now. So we're going to go into the terminal and we're going to say npm run test. Yeah, so our tests are passing. It says the sign up screen. So our tests are passing, meaning that the error message for invalid email address is getting properly displayed to our users. So let's talk about this. Why do we even bother to mock third-party libraries? The reason is because your aim is not to test those third-party libraries. We want to believe that the people who wrote the libraries have tested them. So we are not interested in testing them, even if we are the ones that wrote it. Let's say we have microservices or we actually have our own third-party libraries that we built ourselves. What we are trying to focus on at this moment is testing our front-end applications and our components. So we do not want to interfere with whatever is happening on at any other place. We just want to focus on this. And we do not come to even think of it. If you are testing a third-party library that your company is paying to use, do you want to be calling the API all the time you are writing a test or you are testing your application? No, you don't want to do that. You may want to do it when you are doing end-to-end testing, which is not even done as often as unit testing. But as far as unit testing is concerned, you don't want to touch live APIs. You want to mock the APIs, you want to mock third-party libraries and all that, so you can be able to focus, and also so you can save your company whatever cost it will take to hit third-party APIs while you're writing your test. The next test case we are going to be writing is for invalid password. And in this case, invalid password, based on what we have in our validation function, invalid password is a password that is less than 6 characters. So your invalid password can be anything. Your password validation can just be that you want your users to have special characters, uppercase letters, lowercase letters, and all that. Whatever your validation is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you are testing for the behavior of your application when a user enters the wrong or the invalid input element. So you are still going to go through the same process as we have here on this application. And now we have the fourth test case, which says we are testing that the application displays error message for short password. Actually, this should be for invalid password because we are testing for invalidity. We don't really know if it's short or whatever. The important thing is that we are testing that the password is valid and that an error is displayed when the user enters invalid password. So like we did for the email address, we get the sign in button, we enter a valid email address this time around, then we enter an invalid password. Then we filled up the form using the fill and submit form function, and we get the error message component, and then we say that we are expecting that the error message should have the content password should be at least 6 characters, and we are also testing that the sign in with email and password method of Firebase was not called. And remember, we have actually mocked the functionality, how the sign in with email and password method functions. So this is what actually happens when the user enters an invalid email address, and valid or invalid password doesn't matter at this point. So it says please enter a valid email address. That is what we are testing for the first one. Then for the second one, which is testing for password, let's say we have a valid email address. So we say vanilla at flavors.com, and then we enter a password that has just maybe 3 characters. Then we click on the sign in button. It says password should be at least 6 characters. Same thing happens when we click on the sign up button. Now that we are done with testing for invalid form input elements, we are now going to be testing for when those input elements are valid and the sign in button works as expected. Okay guys, so we have our fifth test here, which is testing for the sign-in component, and we have the screen, the sign up screen rendered. We are now having our, down here we have our sign in button, we have the fill and submit form. Now there's a difference between this test case and the previous one we've had. We didn't have this mock sign-in resolve, and that was because we actually, this sign-in functionality was not getting completed due to the invalid form input elements. Now that we are having valid form input elements, we want to go ahead and test what happens after that. And in this case, remember up here, we already mocked our sign in with email and password function. If you check the sign in functionality we have inside the component, we have that upon successful signing, which is here, we are saying that we want to get the user credentials and then we want to do something else after getting the user credentials. So this is the resolve part of the function, and this is the reject part of the function. So we'll be testing for the resolve part, we'll be testing for the reject part as well. Now for the resolve part, we did not account for what happens when there's a successful sign-in here. So we are going to account for it inside the test case itself. So we'll be going back here, and that is what we have here. We are mocking the sign-in resolve. When there's a successful sign-in, we want to say the function should return user credentials. Remember, user credentials, and this is actually user credentials. I mean, we could have as well just defined user credentials somewhere up here and just entered it here. Anyway, let's just do that. So we'll say const user credentials equal to, so we'll just pick up user credentials, place it here, and then have this here. So this is actually what is happening on the left hand side here, returning the user credentials. Okay, and of course you want your user credentials to be the same user credentials that the user entered in the input element, which is the email address and the password. In this case, we are not returning the password, so we are not going to have the password. What we'll have is the user ID. So let's just assume this is the ID of this particular user. Remember, we are just assuming, we don't want to do this in real, like we don't want to do this like it's a real life stuff. We're just kind of simulating real life scenarios and saying this is what this is the kind of data we are expecting when the user hits this sign in with email and password method from Firebase authentication. So we have the test failing, and the reason we have it failing is, okay, so this is for the sign in with email and password method. So it's saying that the auth is coming as undefined instead of as an object. Okay, so that's because what we have here, remember that this auth is coming from the Firebase util function, we have this here. And so it takes the get auth method, which is the get auth method we have imported into our test. But then it is the get auth method is called and it returns something which is auth. Now in this case, our test is saying that it is expecting the auth to be an object, and actually we are the one that added these expectations. So what we will do is to go up here where we have the get auth, and rather than just return a function, what we'll have is to return a function that actually returns a callback function with an object. Now the reason why we have this at here, which we actually need to import, we're importing it from React testing library. So the reason why we have the at, if you remember from the part 1 of the tutorial where we talked about the fact that if your component is changing state or is using the navigation method of React, then you need to account for that navigation or that change of state. Now in this case, going back into the component, we have that when the method is resolved, the user is navigated or the user is sent to the home page. So because of this navigate function, that is why we are making use of this at, so that we can account for what happens in this case. You will notice that if we comment this out, Jest is going to throw an error that will ask us to account for it, even though the tests are passing. Yeah, but like I said earlier, do not ignore error messages on your terminal. So it says an update to browser router inside a test was not wrapped in at. And if you scroll down, it says when testing, code that causes React state updates should be wrapped in at, and it shows where the problem is coming from, which is in the component because of this navigate. So just because we are making changes to our state, we have to account for it, and that's why we are using the at method here. And that should clear up the error, and our tests are still passing. So the next thing we want to do is to also check for when the user is using a wrong email or a wrong password. In this case, this is not form validation. Now this is when the email address is actually wrong. Maybe the user doesn't even have an account on the platform, or the user has an account on the platform but the password is the wrong password. So that is what we'll be testing for next. So here we have a new test case. The difference between this and the last one we wrote is that this one is testing for a rejection while the other one is testing for a successful promise resolve. Okay, so and that's what we have on the right hand here, where we say wrong email or password. So that is what we're testing for here. So we say the sign in with email and password dot mock rejected value, and we are throwing a new error saying wrong email or password. Let's compare that to what we had before. What we had before was sign in with email and password, mock resolved value, and then we're passing in the user credentials for a successful sign-in. Here we are mocking reject value, and we are passing in an error message to be thrown for an unsuccessful sign-in. Now please remember that we already mocked this function as a we mocked this as a function up here, but we didn't mock its behavior, like what it returns, assuming this function. Now this we can't check for this because we don't want to go into the third party library and go and find out the behavior of this thing, but by using it we already know that there are two occasions, there are two scenarios: when it is resolved and it returns the user credentials, or when something goes wrong, when there's an error and we have the wrong email or password error message. Now, assuming this function does not return anything at all, then this is the only thing we need to do, just mark the function itself. But for us to check what it returns, whether it returns something successful or it returns an error message, then that is why we needed to go down here and account for when there's a resolve and also when there is a reject, so that we can account for what the function actually returns in this case. And then we'll do something similar for the create user with email and password, which in this case is register. If we go on the left hand side, open the register function, we have just similar functionality actually, although a different method, but we already marked the method the same way. Then we have what happens when there is a successful resolving of the promise and when there is a rejection. We'll do the same thing we did for the sign in with email and password. We'll repeat it for the create user with email and password. So here on the right hand side, we have a mock register resolve. Then we have the sign up link. Now this sign up button or link is different from what we used earlier. What we used earlier is the sign in button, which we got by the button row and the name of the button, or the name of the role actually. But in this case, we are getting the sign up link, not button now, because it's actually a link and not a button. So we are picking it up by the test saying sign up now, and then we are filling the form and passing in the sign up link as the button we are going to be using. Then we are saying that we are expecting the function which we defined up here to have been called with an empty object, which in this case represents auth, just like we have on the left hand side here. Then the email address, like we have on the left hand side. Then the password, like we have on the left hand side. This should be password value since we already assigned it a variable. Okay. Then we are saying that we also expect that the function should have been called one time. And then we also account for the at, because we have a navigate method here that causes a state change or a state update. And that is it. Finally, we'll also account for what happens when there's a registration failure. Here it is, the same thing actually we are repeating over and over again so that you can get used to it. We have the render method here, then we have the mocking of the reject functionality with an error message. Then we pick up the sign up link button or the sign up link test, which is this test down here. Then we fill the form and we have our assertions which says expect mock register reject to have been called with the auth, the email address, and the password. And then we are also saying that we expect it to have been called once. Then we are also saying that we are expecting the error message to show wrong email or password. And that is it, guys. That is it. It's quite simple. By the time you understand how React Testing Library works, you find it very easy to use. So guys, thank you so much for staying with me to the end of this tutorial. Do not forget to subscribe, like, comment and share. I would really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye.